Yeah, okay, so just before I get into saying a few words on behalf of Stop AUKUS WA, we'll just run through the quotable quotes from Donald Trump. So bear in mind, these are real quotes. This is not satire. So we've got, in the wake of the attacks on Israel, we've been disgusted by the support for terrorists on campus. We will revoke the student visas of anti-American and anti-Semitic foreigners on campus and send them home. Quote number 2. You should let Israel go and finish the job. And quote number 3. Gaza is valuable real estate. It could be better than Monaco. Continues, my son-in-law Jared suggests we just move people out and clean it up.
Shame! Shame! More ethnic cleansing suggested by the Yankees.
Alright, so and you should bear in mind that Trump has confirmed his support for AUKUS. And I want to tell you a little bit more about that. Alright, well, as you've already heard from the other speakers, what the last 14 months has shown is that no violation of international law, no crime, no matter how vile, not even genocide, the most serious crime of all, will stop the pipeline of weapons flowing from the west to Israel. In fact, before the invasion of Ukraine, US weapons supplies to Israel were more than every other country in the world combined. Shame! And we need to stop and reflect on why this is the case. The state of Israel remains a key strategic bulwark, a wedge, a spoiler in the Middle East on behalf of the United States. It's a fortress for US interests. For Western powers, and for the United States in particular, support for Israel is non-negotiable. That's why we're having such a hard time to force our government to do the right thing, the bare minimum, by the Palestinians. Some of you have heard this before. But here's a quote from Alexander Haig, US Secretary of State under Richard Nixon. And he once put it this bluntly, and these are his exact words. Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk. Does not even carry one American soldier and is located in a critical region for American national security. And I think it's really important to wrap our heads around that when we ask why does the United States, Australia, Britain, are they so implacable in their support for Israel? Because often people think it's the so-called Israel lobby. And now, the danger of putting too much emphasis on the so-called Israel lobby, at best, is you can put the cart before the horse, and at worst, you can buy into the sort of Jewish conspiracy theories. That's not to say that there isn't a powerful Israel lobby. Of course there is. But why is it powerful? Why does it exist? It's like, why is there a powerful mining lobby in Western Australia? Because mining companies run our bloody economy. That's why.
Yay!
Now, we have seen a relative decline in US economic power over the last few decades. Relative both to its allies in Western Europe and Japan and a new power like China. But the consequence of this is that it leads the United States, with a decline in its relative economic power, to lean into military power even more. It makes it more dependent on its military supremacy to preserve its dominance, and it actually makes it even more dependent on Israel to project that hegemony into the Middle East. And it has the military means to do so. Because for all the talk about Chinese and Russian military power growing, which they have, it still remains the case that the United States and its allies account for 75% of global military spending. 75%. Our struggle in support of the Palestinian people is bound up in the struggle to break Australia's military alliance with the United States. Because in practice, that's what cutting bilateral military ties with Israel means. Our number one demand, if we want to help the Palestinian people, is to do what we can to make Australia not part of the problem. And that's got to start with cutting bilateral military ties. But that is not... That immediately puts you into conflict with AUKUS, ANZUS, and everything else about our military alliance with the United States.
So be it.
Now, AUKUS is not just about the submarines. The submarines, of course, and the $368 billion and counting is the flagship AUKUS thing. But it's a whole lot more than AUKUS, and I briefly want to give you a sense of that. So HMS Sterling, so that's the naval base just down here at Garden Island, or the Air Force base in the Northern Territory, the Naval Communication Base near Exmouth, all of them under the terms of the Force Posture Agreement, which Australia signed with the United States some years ago, are now what are known as agreed facilities. That means they have in effect become joint bases with the United States that it can operate out of. In addition to that, there's the intelligence sharing. And some of you already know that there's the Pine Gap base near Alice Springs that already transmits information to Israel about the situation on the ground in Gaza and helps Israel pinpoint the missiles that have killed, we know, at least 40,000 people, but according to the Lancet, it's well over 100,000 people.
Nice.
And it's not just the Pine Gap spy base. There's the Australian Defence Satellite Communication Station at Kojarina near Geraldton. So there's a base here in Western Australia that is transmitting vital data to the Israeli military. And then on top of that, we've got active participation of Australian defence assets and personnel in US strikes on countries without any parliamentary oversight, such as the attacks on Yemen. So to wrap your head around that, Australian personnel, Australian assets paid with our taxpayers' money being used to bomb a foreign country without even going to Parliament.
Shame!
Let alone an election, let alone us being consulted. That's what the US alliance means in this context. And now the United States says it would love to be able to use Cocos Islands as well to station its bombers. Furthermore, Australia is now classified under US regulation as a domestic state for the purposes of supplying critical minerals. So that means a guaranteed supply of critical minerals to the United States. And the Australian companies that have agreed to sell things like lithium to the United States under the terms of this agreement are not allowed to trade with China or have any Chinese ownership or any business interest with China whatsoever. What this points to is a total integration of Australia's defence, scientific, technological and some of our industrial assets into US strategic, including military strategic aims. And that of course means a potential war with China, but it also means US policy on Israel. And that's why it leaves no room for Australia to take a position separate to the United States on any major issue, including support for Israel. It's why Wong and Albanese offer crumbs to the Palestinians, or to us, to our sentiment, public opinion in Australia. They offer us crumbs, but it's business as usual in terms of bilateral military ties with Israel. It's why, for instance, that Penny Wong will say to us with a straight face, Australia is doing all that it can, and it has barely any, it can't really do anything anyway. I've just been through that list of what Australia is actually doing. But then at the same time, Mark Dreyfus goes running across to Tel Aviv to amend the relationship with Israel. I mean, and when you think about that, is essentially the function of the Labor government. Like Peter Dutton, he can just be more blatant about it. He can just say, we support Israel 100%. You know, Peter Dutton is appealing to that section of the population that just, because of Australia's colonial settler heritage, just identifies with Israel. They just see the Palestinians as the barbarians in the global south, and Israel is the civilised, West, and we'll support them no matter what. That's all they need to know. There is a section of the Australian population that thinks like that. Okay? But the Labor Party can't do that. The Labor Party's got to go along with business as usual, as well as pretend to hear the concerns of the Palestinians. So that's why we get this double-speak bullshit from Penny Wong, about Australia's doing all that it can, when it hasn't even done 1% of what it needs to do to stop the genocide. Now, it continues, and this is where Australia's relationship with Israel gets even more intense. So under the Pillar 2 of AUKUS, this sets out terms for cooperation for advancing technologies, including AI, drones, undersea capabilities, quantum science, autonomy, advanced cyber, hypersonics, electronic warfare, the list goes on. So this in turn means expanding and entrenching bilateral military ties between Australian business and Australian weapons manufacturers. And this has to be because Israel is not just essential, but a cutting-edge player in all these military technology industries. And Israel also performs the function for Western powers of road testing these technologies on Palestinian lives. At these conventions, like we had one in Perth, the weapons fair, less than 6 months ago. They boast that these weapons are tested in the real world, and they try to sell them to other customers. So there's a whole in this whole sort of Cold War arms race associated with AUKUS. There are a whole bunch of companies, Australian companies that are either Australian companies or companies that are based in Australia that are linked to both AUKUS and to Israel. And I'll just give you some of them, and I thank Leone and Stop AUKUS for doing some of the research on this. So there's one called Angeril, which basically develops air-ground defence capabilities. Bisalloy Metals, which sells armour to the IDF and has contracts for the nuclear submarines. There's BAE Systems, which, as you know, supplies components to the F-35s that are wreaking havoc on Palestinian lives. And it's worth just a little detour here as well, because this is, another example of the two-faced, fence-sitting bullshit from Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese. They say Australia doesn't directly supply weapons to Israel. No, it supplies parts to Israel. And there's excuse the language, it's a fucking F-35. Well, what part are we supplying? Are we just, especially for us in Australia, not because the lives of Palestinian people are worth any more or less than the tens of thousands of people who have died in Sudan or in Myanmar or in the Congo, they're not. But for this reason, because the eyes of the world are on Palestine, and our government, and by extension us, are implicated in the genocide. And so I'm going to ask you these questions. Are we going to continue to live in a world where might is right and international humanitarian law counts for nothing? No! Are we going to live in a world in which the real response to catastrophic global warming is a war for resources against the people of the global south and repression at home? No! Because if we fail the Palestinians, then the actual answer to both those questions is yes. When you think about it. If we can't stop this, we're not hiding to nothing to try and fix everything else. I don't say that to make people despondent, but just to there's a placard going around about the road to peace going through Palestine, or free Palestine, free the world, I think it says. And I think we should take that on board. That's not just a slogan. It's a truth. It's a factual truth. It's a statement of fact. And it's also, for us, we take it as a moral obligation. And I think what we can do time ago, it's going to require people power. They're going to be dragged, kicking and screaming. We're going to need to build patiently and impatiently at the same time, if you take my meaning, majorities for change. And here I want to say that every single one of you, Friends of Palestine and all the other associated groups, doctors, students, Jews, unionists, teachers, I know I've forgotten someone, all the groups for Palestine, the networks for Palestine have done an amazing job to be out every single fortnight, if not every week, for over 14 months. It is huge. And it's particularly, it really is, and I'll tell you why. It's particularly significant because when you think about some of the big movements of the past that really changed things, like anti-Vietnam War movement, anti-apartheid movement, the anti-nukes movement in the early 90s, by the time they got to be really mass movements, it's something that we're still aiming for, tens, even hundreds of thousands of people, they had a level of institutional support. Now, what I mean by that is that there a lot of the NGOs, some of the churches and the trade unions supported them. With their reach, with their resources, with their authority, and with some notable exceptions, that hasn't really happened. Not yet. We aim to make it happen, but it hasn't happened yet. Either because they're too scared of upsetting the apple cart with the Labor Party with the election coming up, either they're too scared of being branded as being anti-Semitic under this disingenuous bullshit campaign that's been unleashed by Albo. They haven't yet really supported us. So we haven't had those resources. So it's really has been the hard yakka of grassroots activists like you that have got us to this point. But now we've got to reach out and build majorities for change.